With Election Day less than 2 weeks away, there's a lot to talk about. Can there be such a thing as too many candidates in one race? What are the benefits of so many voices? Plus, the role something called Zuckerbucks is playing in the battle over the Secretary of State's office and election security here in Kansas. But first, a three-way fight to be the next Kansas Attorney General. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Welcome back to Kansas Week. I know it's been a while, but we're back with new equipment, a new home, a new look, but the same in-depth information about the world around you that you've come to expect from us. With early voting already underway in the highly contested August primary, we've got a lot of ground to cover today. But first to note, you'll notice we're not really talking about the biggest ticket item on the ballot, the abortion amendment. That's because next week's show will be nothing but that issue. So today we're concentrating on the contested races across the state, starting with the Attorney General's race and a three-way battle for the Republican nomination. Here's a look at one of their debates. Former Secretary of State Chris Kobach, former Assistant U.S. Attorney Tony Mattivi, and Kansas State Senator Kelly Warren have a lot of the same ideas on the issues the next Attorney General will likely face and how to handle it. But they still found plenty to disagree on during Wednesday's face-off in Overland Park, beginning with Chris Kobach's loss 4 years ago to Governor Laura Kelly.
And we could not get protection for our school children against critical race theory in Kansas because we have a 2018 loss as Republicans to a Democrat governor.
The polls currently show me beating the Democrat in this race by a sizable margin. With regard to 2018, anybody who follows political history knows that 2018 was a bloodbath for Republicans.
And questioning what sort of experience is best for someone seeking the job of Attorney General.
I am the Republican conservative Kansan who runs best against the Democrat. I am the outsider, I am the prosecutor, and not the politician.
Afterward, all three telling me, despite these attacks, debates like this are important in helping voters make a decision.
I actually think that debates make a difference when television stations cover them.
We're gaining support from voters and businesses, industry leaders across the state.
It's just like trying a case to the jury. You want the jury sitting in the box, nodding their head when you make your best arguments, and that's what's been happening.
So much to discuss there. Now, a quick note, that debate was actually about 3 weeks ago, but we weren't on the air, so we're sharing it with you now. And a lot there, nothing really has changed as far as the issues amongst those three candidates since then. So here to help with discussing this race, we've got a bigger panel with our new set. And joining me, we have Sean Lojing, the State House reporter from KWCH-TV. And we have Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State University. On my other side, we have Jim Howell, Sedgwick County Commissioner and still a Republican, but a former state representative.
That's right.
We've had a few stumbles on that lately. And John Wright, the news director from KQAM. Thank you all so much for joining us. And you know what? I'm going to throw this out there. And Neil, I'm going to start with you. You're like, duh. We have had a lot of talk about this race, a lot of talk about Kobach kind of being the de facto leader there. Does he still lead in that race? Is he still kind of the one expected to win, or is this tighter than people are thinking?
Well, I mean, there's been a little bit of polling, but you really shouldn't trust that so much, particularly considering, you know, most people that are going to vote probably have very little knowledge about the other two candidates, Warren and Mattivi, but people know stuff about Kobach. And, you know, I think Chris Kobach, I don't know if he can beat any single Republican in the primary right now, but he could beat two, because that same 30-35% of the vote he's been getting recently might be enough. And that's what the Democrats want, because Chris Kobach is very beatable. And even though he and the other two candidates really don't differ on much of anything, but Kobach is just toxic among voters. And he might, you know, have a significant drag on the entire Republican ticket, most of whom it doesn't really matter. But if I were Derek Schmidt, who's running for governor, I'd really hope that Chris Kobach doesn't win the primary.
No. Jim, you're the Republican at the table. What do you think?
Well, I think Neil's exactly right. This race has really been about who can win in the Democrat general. Warren, that's really been her number one message, is she can win the general. And Kobach has obviously spent a lot of his time trying to prove that he can win the general. So that is really the big topic. They're battling for which one is the most conservative. The Republicans love to vote for conservative candidates. And MatTV, that's really been his biggest challenge, is trying to prove to everyone he's actually is a conservative. But the conservatives I know, they're split between Warren and Kobach. And Warren's message is she can win the general, and the same message from Kobach. That's really who's actually more believable is really the challenge right now.
And now, Sean, I know you and I have both been covering this race. One of the things that I've really noticed is the amount of advertising coming out in support of Warren, and the obvious money that is behind her race, probably a sign of how much of the establishment really supports her candidacy.
And just on that point, yesterday we got the announcement from Pompeo that he was going to be endorsing Warren for this AG race. So that's going to be a big boost possibly for her candidacy, especially maybe giving her a bit more name recognition on the ballot. But yeah, we've been seeing a lot of ads in this race. The TVA releasing an ad recently for his own campaign. So we'll see if that has any play when it comes to actually changing voters' minds come August 2nd.
And John, you and I have been around for quite some years covering various elections. How much import does a endorsement like Pompeo's really have in a race like this?
It does carry a significant amount of weight, as high as Pompeo was able to go all the way to the White House. People in that sphere are going to listen. They're going to give these candidates an opportunity to show who they really are, whether they're really conservative or what side of the party they want to land on, because it seems to me everyone's trying to grab the vacancy and fill that void to obviously attract the most voters. So if you can get that message out, Warren may have a chance against Kobach, although Kobach, has history, and that's the one thing that might turn against him.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about the split amongst conservatives and support in this race. But there's kind of a wild card, and that is that abortion amendment that is on the plate, or on the ballot, excuse me, also on the plate, I guess, whatever. And it really could change who actually shows up for this primary election.
Right, and so, there seems to be evidence that actually you're going to see more Democrats and unaffiliated people than normally will vote on the August 2nd ballot. I don't know if that will affect the Attorney General's race, which really is the only statewide primary that's contested right now. I think a lot of it will determine partly on how credible these candidates can be with conservatives about abortion. And I'm not sure there will be a lot of difference between them. But one thing voters should know, that you look at what Chris Kobach did about trying to find cases of illegal immigrants voting in Kansas and trying to make life difficult for people voting and for people who don't look like Kansans looked 100 years ago. Chris Kobach, if he's elected Attorney General, will take the same kind of energy and put it toward persecuting and prosecuting, depending on your particular perspective, those that are interested in accessing abortion services. And so Chris Kobach's career is at a low point now, and maybe the lowest point. But if he's in office while this state can be regulating abortion, then he is going to be using that particular position as Attorney General to rehabilitate his national career and try to make himself, Trump before Trump again.
Okay. Well, mentioned that, in your opinion, this is the only truly contested race on the ballot. We've had some disagreement on that already here. So let's turn to the Secretary of State's race that has become surprisingly competitive, at least in some views, all because of the continued concern about election security among some Kansans and something known as Zuckerbucks. The fight over Zuckerbucks goes back to the last election, when companies from around the nation began to help with the efforts to run a safe election in a pandemic, offering everything from hand sanitizer to cash grants.
I apologize for the short notice.
Those grants became known as Zuckerbucks among conservatives, worried their ties to big tech, like Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook, might influence future elections. What does that have to do with this year's Secretary of State primary? Challenger Mike Brown has accused current Secretary of State Scott Schwab of accepting millions of these Zuckerbucks.
We didn't take it because there's so much technology in the election space. You don't want anything that can be perceived as a conflict of interest.
But Schwab says he did leave it up to counties to decide for themselves, with less than a quarter taking the grants. That included Johnson County, where Mike Brown was a county commissioner in 2020, the commissioner who moved to accept the money.
I moved to accept a grant from the Center for Tech and Civic Life in the amount of $856,245.
I get accused of something that the person accusing me themselves did it. He did it and blamed me. I'm sorry, but you're not going to live very long in Kansas politics if you live that way.
I specifically asked, what are the strings attached and whose money is it? I was told it's just a big group, it's altruistic, they just want to help us get the elections done in this time of COVID and difficulty and challenge and overall expense, and there are no strings, Commissioner. So I voted for it. And in fact, I was lied to.
Now, a quick note, that interview with Brown was actually done a couple of weeks after the original story on Zuckerbucks aired. We were not able to get more than a statement from him in the original story. That's why you saw kind of an imbalance in the sound bites there. Obviously, we always try to keep things fairly balanced here. And this is a race that many folks kind of considered a slam dunk for Scott Schwab. Certainly, Neil, you have made that comment before. Jim, before the show started, you were disagreeing with that. You kind of thought it was tighter.
I think that election security is an extremely hot topic on the Republican side, and this is a Republican race. And so right now, Mike Brown is using that as his number one platform. And of course, there's a debate as to who accepted Zuckerbucks. We just tell you that Sedgwick County, 8 days before that, we had a vote on this, and it passed 3-2. I voted against it here. It was in the news. I do know for a fact that Mike Brown was given a briefing sheet saying that the money was going to be used to buy ballot boxes. That's the other part of his platform. He wants to get rid of ballot boxes on day one. That's what he says. But that money was specifically used to purchase ballot boxes in Johnson County. So I think he has a problem right now. And it's funny to me that it is true that he did make that motion. He should have known better. If he stands against it now, he did have the information. I had the information 8 days before that. So I know for a fact he had to have had the information. So it's disappointing to see him accusing the state. And I've checked this out. The state, just like Scott said, he left it up to each county. Central County did accept money as well as Johnson County did. But at the end of the day, Mike Brown made that motion, and he should have known better.
So, Neil, in this race, the incumbency usually has a whole lot of power, especially in the Kansas primaries. Which is more strong at this point, though, the incumbency or those concerns about election security?
Well, I think that if Brown could make stick on Schwab, that Schwab was not a defender of election integrity as Republicans and conservatives understand it, I think he'd have a real shot. The trouble is, as Jim mentioned, there's some issues about Brown's past for the last couple of years on this issue. I think it's not as simple as saying somehow we shouldn't be taking money from the Zuckerbergs, because the Zuckerbergs make billions and billions of dollars because off of Facebook ads and other kinds of things. They want to try to help localities with the problem that we do not vote enough money for election administration, and that is true at every level of government in this country. But I don't think this is the kind of issue that's really going to take down Schwab, because frankly, I think most voters aren't going to have a lot of understanding of this and aren't going to have a lot of knowledge. And also, if this was a Democrat running for re-election with these kind of attacks, then I think it could be different, because their Republicans have a fairly not easy, but a clear kind of argument against the Democratic Secretary of State, although we don't elect those in Kansas, at least in any time that I've been here. So I would say that Schwab is still the significant favorite, but he certainly has been bloodied a bit more than you would expect a few months ago.
Yeah. And Sean, I know when I ran the story on Zuckerbucks, we had quite a few viewers who, even after the story aired and had the explanation, were emailing me going, what is this that you're talking about? Is it something that's so esoteric that the general voter just really doesn't seem to care?
It might just be something that passes over people's head when they go to the ballot box. It's just a term that is being thrown out there, so they may pay attention to it, they might look into it, but most people might just take it as something they just pass by in the end.
No. All right, well, can there be such a thing as too many candidates for one office? If there is, it might be the U.S. Senate seat in the ballot this year. Take a look.
I also want to overhaul the legal system. I have a method. It's been on my website for 19 years.
Certainly we know the country's divided and people have strong feelings.
2 Republicans and 6 Democrats.
May 2nd is when the leak came out of Washington, the pending change and overturning of Roe v. Wade. In that moment, I knew that this was the time to step up.
All vying.
If somebody like me doesn't run, then there's no chance that my ideas can be presented to the general public.
For the same job.
I want to be the lead on fixing our tax system.
There are at least as many reasons for running as there are candidates for the office of U.S. Senator from Kansas. They range from a tax preparer to a lifelong educator, a former police officer to the state's first openly LGBTQIA candidate, Michael Sudart. But what's attracting so many people to this race? Political analyst Dr. Neil Allen says part of it is just a change in attitude toward politics.
We're seeing participation increase in all ways, that in terms of turnout, in terms of people running for office, in terms of people giving money to candidates and to issue campaigns.
I think every race, honestly, should have multiple candidates on every side, even throw a few independents there.
And pretty much everyone we spoke with liked the fact they had so much competition this year. Even the incumbent experts have called bulletproof.
I want people to engage in the management and running of this country, and so the fact that people are on the ballot, I think, is a positive thing.
It says a lot about Kansas wanting to make a difference.
I never thought I would ever be doing this, I can tell you that.
So, the big question, is 8 enough? John, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
8 isn't enough. There needs to be more. But unfortunately, because of how politicians are viewed and the reaction to their politics and how they vote, and where they come from, how much money they have, what position they take on these issues, most won't jump in. Kudos to those that do, but there's a lack of representation on people, for example, that look like me in politics, even in the State House. We have the same people going in unopposed, and if they do have oppositions, only 1, maybe 2, and it's pretty much a landslide. But it's encouraging to see more people get back involved. We're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully, although we have some numbers coming up. But to get more people involved, different ideas are out there to give the voters an opportunity to choose which direction they want the country to go in and who they want to represent them here from Kansas.
Well, and certainly it does make it difficult for folks like us, John, Sean, and I, to do our jobs, because when there are that many candidates, it's hard to fit them into a minute and a half story.
I think especially for the Democratic side, when people go to the ballot here on August 2nd, there's probably going to be some Democrat voters who don't know all the names on that ballot. So it's going to be...
If any of them.
Yeah. So it's going to be a big question if any of those candidates have really broken through the forefront for the voters.
Yeah. And name recognition certainly is a big deal, Neil.
Right. And also, I mean, it says something about Senator Moran's popularity in general and also about the Democratic Party here in Kansas. So we don't really have a serious, viable candidate. And also, the Democrats have, I think, 11 state senators, and not a single one of them is up for re-election this year. But none of them is willing to take a free run at Moran. And it makes sense because, you know, they'd be lucky to break 40%, and that wouldn't be good for their careers later. But it is good that we will actually have a name on the ballot from the Democrats, because there should not be an uncontested Senate race in November.
All right. Well, the race for Kansas treasurer may be hard for some voters to make a decision in, because in so many ways, the two candidates seem almost identical. State Senator Karen Tyson versus State Representative Stephen Johnson. To many, they seem to be two sides of the same coin, both Republicans who entered the State House at the same time a decade ago. Both entered through the Kansas House, though after one term Tyson moved over to the Senate. Both served most of the years in the legislature as chairs of their respective tax committees. So what separates them? I sat down with both to find out.
What I did prior to the legislature actually fits very directly with that, managing cash flows and investments for the state. I got my MBA in finance from the University of Chicago after my undergrad degree here at K-State, and then went to work 24 years full-time in the financial services industry.
There's differences in our voting records. He voted for the 2 largest tax increases ever in the state of Kansas. One of them made us the 2nd highest in the nation for sales tax on food. I voted no on all of that legislation and fought against it, and I fought for true tax relief for Kansas citizens.
So, is there enough difference between these candidates to allow voters to really make a knowledgeable choice? Jim? It's your party.
Well, I had the privilege of serving with both of them actually in the Kansas House. They both went into office the same year that I did in 2011. And I like them both. They're both friends of mine. I think that the Republicans have a choice here. The difference, I believe, is, again, they're both, I think, well-known representatives in the House and of course in the Senate now. Karen is claiming to be more conservative than Stephen. I think Stephen is claiming to have more financial expertise in terms of the details of running that office. And so it comes down to, do you want conservative values? If that's what really drives your interest, then maybe Karen would be the candidate you would be wanting to support. If you want somebody who's going to be excellent in managing the billions of dollars our state has to manage, Stephen might be the guy. So we really have two great choices here. It is a hard race to pick, and even myself, I'm not sure which one I'm going to vote for yet. It's hard for Republicans to figure this one out.
Yeah, and when we talk about that race, part of the reason why we have two candidates, Sean, is because of how Lynn Rogers actually ended up in that position. Republicans were very upset that the governor did not name a Republican to replace LaTurner in that spot.
Yeah, so that might be driving out a few more Republicans to actually pay attention to this race after that change in leadership or change in leadership office, because of Governor Kelly picking her, at the time, Lieutenant Governor, to lead up that office now. So we'll see if that actually plays an impact in getting more Republicans to actually care about this race.
All right. Well, there may have been an overabundance of candidates for U.S. Senate. Candidates for the Kansas House are kind of at the other end of the scale. I take a look at why. The Kansas Reflector reports of the state's 125 House seats, 55 of them are already decided because only one person filed to run. Another 10 races only have a primary contest, which means voters won't get a choice in the general election in more than half of the Kansas House seats. Of those running unopposed, 36 are Republicans, while 19 are Democrats. And they include some of the most respected lawmakers of the state House, as well as some of the most controversial, including Representative Christy Williams from Augusta, Representative Stephen Owens from Heston, and the four leaders of the Kansas Future Caucus, a bipartisan group aimed at getting millennials more engaged in American politics. That's a lot of uncontested races, but John, you and I have been around a while. It doesn't really feel like much of a surprise.
No, I walked in to vote earlier this week and looked down at my ballot and said, oh my gosh, who am I at the right in here? Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny? There was no one in there. And as a voter, you're going, what is going on? Why don't we have people that are stepping up and filling these spots? The answer is anyone's guess. Maybe it's apathy. Maybe it's, well, I need to take care of some personal issues. I don't want to put myself out there. But it's definitely concerning when the people that you call on to get things done, like tax relief, food tax relief, there's the same people in there and not much movement is happening. This can be frustrating.
Yep. Now, Neil, I know I've spoken with some folks who think that redistricting played a role in this.
I think that's certainly true. I mean that in the past decade, we had a map that the the federal courts drew because the legislature couldn't get their act together to draw themselves, even though the Republicans controlled everything. And they created more competitive seats, although in the state house in some ways to the detriment of Kansas, because they created lots and lots of incumbent versus incumbent races, and we lost a lot of experience in the state house. Now the conservative Republicans were able to gerrymander. I don't know if it's going to have a lot of effect upon who's in the House, because most seats were going to be pretty safe anyway. But it is, but also another reason is being in the Kansas State House is not that good of a job compared to other jobs in politics. And we have a good example here in our friend Jim Howell, who I'm pretty sure, Jim, you work just as hard in the State House as you do now in the County Commission, but you get a living wage as a county commissioner, and the State House members do not. They make $20,000 a year to schlep up from here, from Wichita all the way to Topeka, and have people yelling at them. And so that frankly, we should give our state House members and senators a living wage so that we can attract the best people and keep the people who want to do good work and want to feed themselves and their families.
Yeah. Well, and I know I've talked with some lawmakers who say, yeah, I lose money every year on this job. So, yep. Well, finally today, early voting is already underway across the state, and with the abortion amendment on the ballot, turnout is expected to be high. In fact, in Sedgwick County, early voting on day one was up more than 450% over 2 years ago. KAKE's Jackson Overstreet takes a look.
Monday was a busy morning inside the Sedgwick County Election Office, as it was the first day of early voting for the August 2nd primary.
Since I had to go pay my taxes across the street, just a quick trip across the street, and I wanted to make sure I had my vote counted.
There you go. Now, typically, primary elections have lower turnout. According to the Sedgwick County Elections Office, it averages around 30 to 35% in a normal year. But 2022 isn't a typical election.
We are prepared for 50%. We'd like to see that and more if possible. So we're ready for voters to come out.
That's because of the Value Them Both amendment.
The amendment vote is really important for us, and we're going to be on vacation. So we wanted to make sure that we got to do it in person.
If passed, the amendment would change the Kansas Constitution's protection of abortion access, allowing the state legislature to further restrict or even potentially ban the procedure. That amendment has been the largest force behind the increased interest in the primary.
Unlike most statewide primary elections, this time all registered voters in Sedgwick County will have an opportunity to cast a ballot.
Election Commissioner Angela Caudillo says her poll workers are trained and ready to handle any increase in turnout that beats their expectations. And with such an important amendment on the ballot, voters from today only have one thing to say.
Please come out and vote. Vote now.
Okay, I know that as I have covered this election, certainly I'm hearing more interest from voters than I've heard in a long time. And this is a primary, which usually is very apathetic. Sean, do we maintain this pace, do you think?
Yeah, well, if you look at some of the advanced numbers we've gotten so far from the Kansas Secretary of State's office, just for advanced mail-in ballots for this race, it's nearly double what we saw in 2018, the last midterm. And for just in-person voting, there's almost 50,000 people that have voted in-person advanced so far. Compare that to 2018, it was about 11,000. So definitely a big increase so far in voter engagement in this race.
And John, I don't know that I've ever seen numbers like this for a primary.
No, and I think one thing that's pushing it is the millennial vote. Ooh, I said it. And also the younger person, the high school age and going into their freshman year in college, they're getting more involved in asking questions and why is it phrased this way? Why is it not phrased this way? Well, I'm going to go vote and see what's happening. So there is more engagement, and that's good to see from the young people.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We are out of time. We always run out of time so quickly. I really appreciate you joining us on our first day back. And we want to thank you so much for joining us. Don't miss next week when we tackle everything related to the abortion amendment. For now, stay safe, have a great week, and don't forget to vote.